All right. Welcome, everybody. It's kind of hard to be the person between you and free booze, but I'll try to do my best. Welcome. Thank you for joining my talk today. Today, I'm going to be talking about taming the logs jungle, and really is related to Daniel's talk. Who was here in the Daniel's talk before? I guess Daniel, yeah. Sorry? Okay, sorry. So the thing is that understanding the data that you collect and how you use that data is important for product development. So today, it's all about how to drive that data, how to get that data that drives your product. So a little bit of history here. I work for Prezi. It's an online presentation software. Actually, this is the tool I'm using today. We've been around for 9 years, have around 100 million presenters and storytellers being all successful. That's why the picture. And we have 360 million presentations in our database, right? It's one of the largest online databases that exist. And we have, because of this reason, we have a lot of views. Now, this is not to boast the numbers, but you can imagine the amount of data that's coming in. And for the 9 years, we've been capturing all that data. And one of the things that happened last year for us was that we have product managers who are tasked to actually get insights from that data. So you can imagine this is the product manager sitting on top of this logs jungle, all this data, all this massive amount of information, and suddenly it's like, well, now give us some insights. Easy, right? So a few actually jump in and go through that jungle and come out. Maybe they'll take an analyst, a UXer, just to sift through that data and try to make sense of it, and then see if that data actually have any results. But the reality was that we were spending a lot of time sifting through that data. We were spending money storing that data. So something had to change. And that's where the concept of taming the logs jungle comes in. So hopefully this will help you. If you're not in this situation, this is also a cautionary tale as well, because we didn't think we were going to end up in the logs jungle, right? So we were always considered to be data-driven. But data-driven for us meant log everything. Everything needs to be logged. Everything needs to be in our data storage. And then at some point, we'll get the insights. The reality was completely the opposite, because we were spending so much time getting those insights that sometimes, yes, we were getting the usual metrics like lifetime value, subscriptions, retention. These kind of metrics are pretty easy to get from the data. But when we were actually trying to understand our usage, our product usage, how our users are using our productivity tool, that's actually harder to get from all those logs, all that information that was coming in. So let's start with the journey. The journey, like any kind of project that you work on, starts with just the hypotheses, right? The hypothesis being that we should be able to get better data for quick insights. And for this, we did a proof of concept. And the proof of concept basically was this. We were starting to develop an audio feature for our product. And essentially is how to embed audio into a frame like this. And then the assumption was, OK, so we already developed it. Why don't we just use that data, put it into this fancy new tool, and we get quick insights? I don't know, does this sound familiar to anybody? Like, have you ever been tasked to just get a bunch of data and just say, OK, just show me the insights? Yeah. Some? And the thing is that one of the things that we tried to do is exactly that. We took the data that we were already capturing and looked at the various tools that would help us get that insight. And the first thing that we actually hit was that we have to re-instrument the actual feature. Because even though we said that we were getting that data that we thought was actionable, we were not really getting that insight that we thought we were. So going through the audio feature, we basically put a spotlight in one-to-one team. That one team, we asked a couple of things. We said, OK, let's rethink how we're going to do this particular feature. Let's instrument it in a way that we can get those quick insights. And then put it into the tool and see what comes out. So in the background, one of the things that we did was actually also think about how we did product development. Earlier this morning, we were talking about different techniques around how to do product dev. In our case, we ended up using game thinking. And this is just a combination of service design and systems thinking and agile, and putting some game design into it. And this is not about gamification. This is not about badges. This is essentially games are really good at forming this progression of how to level people up all the way to mastery, right? How to become that professional player. And that actually resonated well with our product because one of the things that we were seeing was that we needed to level each of our users up. We need to build that skill, make it into a habit. And that loop was so important for us that we said, okay, this is how we need to change product development. So let me start using something called a job story loop. A job story loop is similar to a user story, but it's focused on that loop. And making sure that that loop is engaging, making sure that you're giving feedback to your users so you can level them up. So one of the things that came out of that was, what is that progress? Are users failing at a particular job? If they are, let's talk about that failure. Let's correct that. Let's make that loop better next time. Let's give that feedback directly to the user. This means that we know they failed. Why don't we turn that into a positive experience and put it back into the product? So now we're thinking about not just building a feature, shipping it out, we're also seeing how we can use failure as a positive thing. How do we recover them? Now, the next one was around instrumentation. Like I said, we were really all about logging everything. But this has to stop. So one of the things that I was tasked to is, with that particular team, ask, is this information really needed? Is that event, is that trigger really needed? We drew some inspiration from Intercom. They did something similar a couple of years back. They did something like object action trigger. And that actually we use that kind of framework to understand, when somebody clicks on an object, there was a trigger, and there was an action to it. And we instrumented that particular feature using that. And we were really strict around what event goes in. And that really helped us really cut through what we were actually putting into our data store. So this is now more useful data than before, because now we understand really what is the importance of that trigger, of that information coming in. Now, around quick insights, so Daniel actually posted a pretty good picture of like a funnel or how you progress through. And for us, being a productivity tool, this usually is the same at top of the funnel. But when a user actually goes into the editor, it looks more like this. It's all over the place, right? Being a productivity tool, we don't really have one set path. You go into the editor, you might insert an image or a text, or just play around with the backgrounds or themes. They are all over the place. And that actually is something that you have to be careful about how you structure your data so then you can get meaningful insights. And for that, we actually took a look at some behavioral analytic tooling that is coming up. For us, what that meant was that we can use a tool that we can just basically put all those events coming in, that event stream, and then build patterns over patterns. And those patterns were actually the loops that we were creating in our product. And the other thing that kind of led us to is to also explore loops that we didn't even know. Because once we start understanding all those triggers, all those actions, building those loops, we can understand how many people are actually entering that loop and maybe explore why aren't they? And is it something that maybe it's a feature that needs to be replaced? Or is it because we're not communicating well? There's a lot of things there you can start asking about your product. So what did we learn from the proof of concept? We learned engaging skill-building loops is something that really resonated with our product. And again, this is just a technique. You can use jobs to be done. There's a lot of other techniques that you can do this to map it out to your own product. For us, the job story loop, again, because of the concept of skill building, made a lot of sense. The other thing was we have to be more strict of how we define those events. And that's part of also the conversation. Stop thinking about logs. Think more about events. And when that happens is that now logging is pretty technical. This is just the action of storing, right? The code itself, this is how you log it. And for the most part, in our process of development, logging was always at the end of the process, right? So, oh yeah, we created all this feature. Oh yeah, we need metrics. Wait, let's log this, and then that's our data. And that was wrong because, again, the aspect of the data should be to get to that one measure, get to that result that you want to understand. So you really have to focus first on what is that event, what is that data. And last but not least, we got to standardize our data for insights. So even though we were proud of having massive amounts of information into our data storage, a lot of that data was somewhat useful, and a lot of the data wasn't useful. And the other thing is, over time, it became less useful because less people understood it. So how do we address some of these concepts? So after one team, we kind of had a pretty good indication that this is a good thing. And actually, taking a look into the audio feature gave us pretty good insights, and we felt good about it. So it proved our hypothesis that if we do all those things, we're able to get better insights and better results. But now this is one feature, and this is one team. So how do you take that and apply it through your whole organization? How do you come up with a plan to make sure that all teams are aligned to this new process, figure out how we want to re-instrument our product to focus on insights, into impact, into that measurable key metric? And this is what we came up with. It was a new workflow for us. One of the things I liked about ownership and accountability. This is one of the first things. Let's talk about who will be driving this. For us, is the product manager, whose main responsibility at the beginning is just to understand that job story loop. It might be multiple loops. And instrumenting that will be ultimately their job, because at the end of the day, you will also need to understand what does that look like. Is it really impacting the numbers that you want? Is it really performing as you expect? Is it going against that key result and that objective that your team is after? So after defining the job story, you basically bring the rest of the team, in our case. And this is a cross-functional team. We bring an analyst, UX or designer, an engineer. And then you start breaking that job story loop into events. With the same team, you start documenting that event. And this is really important. I'm going to cover it in a moment. After you document, this is actually the step that you start coding. So now it was much earlier in the process because the engineer was involved in understanding the events, understanding and documenting those events with the analyst, with the PM, and now we can get it into code. Now, last but not least, how to visualize. We're a visualization company. So we want to visualize that data. We want to make it as easy as possible to make sure that product managers can go ahead and understand those results easily. And ultimately, actionable insights. That's the main driver, right? We all want impact. We all want to make sure that we're driving that key result or that measurement. So let's dig deeper into that. Breaking the JSLs to events. The first thing that we didn't do in the original proof of concept was introduce click flows. And you can say click flows, storyboarding. There's a lot of other techniques you can do this. For us, click flows just helped to visualize what we're building, but also to understand what are those critical events. You put a pin, and now people start having conversations around that. Do you actually need that? Is that actually actionable? What does that mean for us? Is that really actually impacting our measurement? Then we fell into a trap, which was user intention versus technical. For us, what that meant was, since we were logging everything, we were really good at what we call technical events. This is how the software works, right? An image is inserted into the canvas. That's very technical. From a user intention, I just want to insert an image. So for the most part, we were always concentrated on instrumenting that last piece, right? That software that actually enters that object into the canvas. But sometimes what happens is that the software has bugs, right? Sometimes. And the thing was that we wanted to focus on user intentions. This particular project was to actually get us better at product analytics, because from a technical perspective, we had a massive amount of logs that we can actually really well understand our errors, our bugs, and debug that. But from a product analytics perspective, we were missing a lot of the information. We had gaps. So for us, we said, focus on user intentions. User intentions meaning I want to present. If that fails in the background, we have logs for that, but at least we understand how many users try to present. And we can recover from those errors, right? So those technical logs and those technical events are important. It's just that for product analytics and the way that we were wanting to understand our product usage was of lesser priority at this moment. The other thing that I kind of started having with multiple teams was this concept of, okay, so who knows about FOMO? Fear of missing out? Yeah? All right. So this is what I'm calling like fear of missing data. And essentially what it means is that there was a lot of conversations of like, okay, let's add this attribute and add this field. I want to understand how many times it was green and how many times they chose red in that occasion. And the thing was that when I asked, so do you really need that data? The answer was, well, we might. Or I might do something in the future with it. And that is actually anti-pattern, because what happens at that point is that you're actually getting all that data in without any context, without any usage. This data is not really impacting your measurements, it's not going after your key results. And as a product person, you got to be careful around that, because the more data you put into the system potentially will harm you at the end, because then other people might start using that data with the wrong assumption, with the wrong usage. And then what happens if somebody takes that data with the wrong assumptions, gets some insights, and you make a decision on top of that? So one of the things I'm trying to say here is the fear of missing data is actually a fallacy, and today it's much easier to collect data than you think. And if you really need that data, just run another experiment that captures that. And then make that actually the use case, because now at that point you do understand why you need that data. If you're thinking about possibilities of how to use that data, that sometimes is good if you're kind of looking longer term strategy, and you can actually justify that. If it's towards maybe a company goal, that data is useful for that company goal, at that point, yeah, it might make sense to get that data up front, because that experiment might not use it, but the upcoming experiments will. But if you can't name any experiments in the future, it doesn't match up to a strategy, probably you don't need that data. So don't log it. Don't ask your engineers to put up that work. Next up is documenting your events. This really helped us understand all our interactions. Creating that catalog of events. This is important because before that, we had a bunch of triggers. We had all those log lines coming in. But we didn't know where it came from and what was the use case. So we actually spent a lot of time digging through the code to understand those two questions. And if we just created a catalog, we're able to get that information up front. So then that means that product manager can actually understand from a list of events if they're thinking about a hypothesis over an existing feature or a couple of actions. Then now they can pick and choose because they understand the context, they understand these triggers, they understand these events. So what it gave us was, first, single source of truth, meaning that all these events now are centralized and documented. We started using standards and naming conventions. Now, this might be kind of obvious, and in our case, we let our engineers for quite a while to really understand how we want to make that log line look like. But we ended up with having an attribute called error message, another one error, another one error massage. But it's because we were not doing a good job at implementing these standards, these naming conventions. These are important, so over time, you understand those events. The last thing that we did with this was actually include an approval process. Now, this might be a little bit of an overhead, but you can make it fun, you can make it more interactive. What we did was, well, we used Slack for communication. We created a Slack group called Lords of the Logs. Made it fun, made it a whole team effort, it's a cross-functional team. And what happens there is that when somebody creates a new event, a new log line, they ping that group. And the role of that group is to make sure that, first of all, we fight that fear of missing data. We really look at the context of what we're trying to understand. Is it measurable? Is it really actionable? Is it going towards that objective that you're wanting to get? And then this process should be quick, right? It shouldn't be something tedious. Since we now have click flows, we have the event documented, we can really map out the whole user experience and then understand from that, oh yes, this makes sense because we're basically triggering a couple of actions here. It actually goes towards the key result or that metric that you're trying to move. And then approve goes on. And we actually want to make this more interactive and potentially maybe go away. For now, we're still using it because it really broadens the use case of how we're using events as we go along. Now, instrumenting the events. This is where it goes a little bit technical. And I just want to highlight two things. When working with product teams or engineers, these kind of stuff, I'm really now advocating logging libraries. And this is something that we missed at the beginning. And when I say logging library, this is not the new fancy logging tool for the developer, but the library should describe how you are documenting that event. The logging library also helps implement those standards, those naming conventions. And engineers don't like to repeat themselves. So if you can use that library to actually implement core attributes that they don't have to program, even better, because now you just save them time. So it used to be the fact that we used to ask, OK, now we want to add a new attribute to a log line. And the engineer goes, oh, man, that's going to take me half a sprint because I have to go in this code and that code and bump everything. But now with the logging library, if it's a core attribute, it's just a matter of adding it to the library. It gets fully deployed. You basically have your information at hand. So logging libraries should map out to what the business looks into the data and make sure that the engineers are faster. And that way, you're also helping them become better because now they don't need to understand the full event. They need to understand the context of that feature. Everything else like platform attributes. So why would they need to, again, re-instrument screen size or a device OS? All of this should be standard, should be given for a developer. Then the other one that we started doing was validating early. This was one that actually caught us pretty bad because we were having the validation of the data at the end of the process as well. So we were ingesting everything and then validating. So the feedback loop was really long. And as a PM, we want to make sure that we are moving ahead and making sure that we're moving fast and giving that feedback loop back to the engineers and to ourselves as product persons. And now, with logging libraries, one of the things that we can do is we can validate that information up front. So we can catch this actually in development, not even in testing in some cases. And this is really important because the other thing that we're getting here is we're getting and raising the confidence and that trust in that data because now you can quickly understand if that data looks good. The other thing that we built into this is getting as real time as possible. So now we can actually look at events coming in and validate if that information looks good and give that feedback back to the teams. Or the engineers can do that for themselves. Then for the visualization part, what we did was we looked at several companies and different tools. The one you're seeing today is called Indicative. The reason we liked them was because, first of all, they gave us options to really understand our events. So now anybody who's in product, who's not an engineer, can actually look at those trigger points and build out different funnels or different loops. And then you can also understand the different loops from the different stages, because not everybody will be part of that same loop. They might fail, they might do different things depending on their skills, and we really needed to understand that. And using a tool like this, we can quickly just put this thing together and understand what is it from the editing, loading the editor, all the way to present, and what are the different steps that they're doing to get there. Are they doing more insert images or text or these kind of stuff? Mapping that pattern is actually really useful. So that was the journey. And at the end of that journey, we actually went ahead and re-instrumented the whole product. We were now getting a lot more information that was better for our insights of how our users are using our product. So I just want to kind of cover a few things, just in case if you're going through something similar or if this situation resonates with what you're doing today. As a product person, I would say first, look at your organization. Are you data-driven or data-informed? Depending on your organization, one way or the other. How data literate are you? Do you need to make simpler tools or implement more tooling to compensate for that? The other is make sure that the team is set up for success. So one of the things is including the analyst, UX designer, the engineer early on in the process really helped us. Because now we get the full picture, the full understanding of what it needs to build that event that makes sense for the product manager, for the analyst, for the UXer, and for engineering. Understand the user intention events, those things that really drive product versus the technical events that drive the debugging and drive the tracing of engineering. Next, instrumentation. Ask your engineers, next time you're with your product team, what happens if you want to make a big change in how you're collecting your data? Does it take months, weeks, days? If it's months, maybe you should look into better instrumentation tactics. So then that way you're faster when you need that new data and you want to collect that. It's easier for your development teams, your product teams. And then the validation. This one is something that is a bit tricky because now you're getting new data. And in our case, we were running in parallel, right? We had this old way of logging where we had a bunch of data and a lot of KPIs and a lot of metrics being built upon. And now we have this new system that we're receiving a lot of new data. And then that system, it's nature, right? It's natural to compare the two. And the thing was that comparing the two started becoming a problem because then you started saying, okay, but this is giving me 10% different than this one. One of the things that was happening was that by focusing on user intentions, now you were logging something different. And it might not be comparable. But if you look at the results of our project, one of the things that was happening in the background was we were creating more transparency, we were boosting the team's confidence in the use of data, and we were gaining speed. Now, with transparency, this actually helped the validation process, because now teams are looking through this catalog of events, which is tied to a logging library, which is actually easier to look through your code to understand where this is triggered. And then the answer of, like, where is this triggered from, what is this context, became something trivial. Or you expect something to come in, you want to debug it. Now we have a real-time dashboard where you can pick up that event and dissect it. So there's no questioning because everything, all that data is back to the team. And doing that, it raised our confidence in how we do product analytics. And we increased the speed to introduce new changes to the way that we collect data. And I actually just want to show you a quick video of, so now with capturing all this information, I want to see if it looks, so you can't see the little dots, but now we're able to see how many times a user is going through a loop, how many times they do that, how quick they're doing this loop. And all these loops are essentially those job story loops that we're building. And this is pretty cool because now, instead of trying to figure out from the data and the logs, we can build this actually in a day. I sat down with one of our analysts, and he basically built this for me for this presentation. And this is amazing because now we're getting results of what are the actions that lead to better retention? What are the top users in building a presentation? What are they doing in those presentations to understand how we can replicate that and level people up? All of this is now being brought in with standards. So then now you can understand what is cross-platform. So essentially, how are mobile, desktop, and web related into this picture? How does that actually lead to lifetime value or more subscriptions? So that's pretty much it for me today. Thank you so much. You can find me in Twitter or LinkedIn. I hope that you get some insights on how to do better product management using the data that actually drives your product. Thank you.
I'm on. Soon, Booze. First questions. Hi, Jose.
Oh.
What behavioral analytics tools did you use?
Yeah, so the one I showcased was Indicative. There's another one called Amplitude. They do similar stuff. And we basically just liked Indicative more because of how they're collecting the events and displaying them.
Thank you. Do you outsource all your analytical visual tools rather than build your own in-house?
Actually, that's the opposite. So the only thing that we're outsourcing from our data platform is data visualization. And it's because of that. The behavioral analytics engine, for us, was something that we didn't want to build in today. And there were actually tools that we can use.
Can you give an example of a job story loop you worked on? I think that's supposed to be loop.
Loop, yeah. Or
loop.
Loop? No. One of the ones I worked on was from the audio feature. So when I am sharing a presentation, I want to include audio so that my narrative gets across to the audience. And building on that, there's other loops that you can go through. Again, it's very similar to the job to be done framework as well.
Hang on. I wanted to do that one. Okay, we'll do this one. How do you attribute the additional revenue generated for Prezi from our inside project? This sounds like someone internal asking the question.
Yeah. So in this case, that one, we just basically attributed how they were performing under subscription. Did they actually upgrade or not? But that's more on the analyst side. I don't really have a good answer.
I've seen you walk into meetings with piles of money.
Yeah, that also helps.
What technologies do you use for logging? Have you not already answered that one?
Well, the logging stack is actually very varied. So we have different platforms. So we have logging libraries for Python, Scala, different iOS flavors. Yeah, so it's all over the place. We also rolled our own. So ingesting that, we have our own logger. And for the backend side, we leverage things like Logstash and like the elk type. Yeah, if you want to know more, happy to talk about it and show you our platform, whoever wrote it. So feel free to ping me.
How do you help your users level up based on these insights?
So how we actually started mapping this out was that based on the interaction, so how many times a user did an action, we started collecting how we thought the user journey would be, right? So for example, there's multiple ways to change your presentation style. So one way is you can actually go into each object and change, the theme, the colors, these kind of stuff. But there's the other features, which is like right-click and apply theme. And what we're trying to do is understand, okay, maybe the first level would be going through all objects. And then the second level would be actually using the more advanced features, applying themes over multiple objects. And understanding those patterns, then now we can trigger from the product and say, hey, we noticed that you just went through 5 different objects and changed the color. Do you know about this feature, about how to apply the theme to all your objects? And at that point, now we're leveling them up, right? Because at that we're actually taking away time from them because now they can do it all in once. So that's how we level up through our product.
Cool. I think we'll stop the questions there because the next one's a GDPR one. And if I've learned anything, it's stay well away from GDPR.
I'm happy to talk about that later.
Yeah, he loves talking about GDPR. I don't even like to listen to him talk about it anymore. It's a personal thing. Thank you again to Jose.
Thank you.